All right, everyone, welcome back. You know how much we love to geek out here, and today we're cracking open one of the most fascinating instruction manuals out there,
Yeah.
our genes.
Yeah. We always say we're going to do a deep dive on genetics at some point, and so this is it.
It's not just about, like, inheriting your dad's bad jokes or anything.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We're talking about the code that makes us tick.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting is genetics is a story told in three parts. We've got transmission genetics, molecular genetics, and then zooming all the way out to population.
Okay, so three parts, three perspectives. Before we get into all that, though, can we just, back up for a sec?
Sure.
Remind me, again, what exactly are genes? I get they're important, but
Yeah.
sometimes they need a refresher on the nitty-gritty.
Think of genes as the blueprints for building and running your body.
Yeah.
They're like the instruction manuals for everything about you, from your eye color to whether you're more likely to get certain diseases. And these instructions get passed down from generation to generation.
So that's where that first part comes in transmission genetics.
Exactly. Transmission genetics is all about inheritance.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Remember those X-shaped things called chromosomes?
Oh yeah, from bio class.
We get half of those from mom and half from dad, and each of those chromosomes is like a bundled up package of genes.
So it's kind of like a microscopic filing cabinet?
Yeah.
And the way those files or genes are arranged determines what traits we inherit.
You got it. And what's really neat? Not all chromosomes are the same.
Oh.
We've got autosomes, which are the same in males and females, and then we have the sex chromosomes, X and Y. They decide if you're biologically male or female.
Wait, so you're telling me that some traits are linked to whether you get an X or a Y?
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
Yeah. For example, some conditions like hemophilia tend to be linked to the X chromosome, which is why they're way more common in males. But let's go back to that filing cabinet analogy for a sec.
Okay.
Because, get this, scientists can actually pinpoint where certain genes are on a chromosome. It's like having an address for each gene.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got these genes, these blueprints being passed down, but I want to know what's happening at the cellular level. How are those blueprints actually being read and used?
That's where molecular genetics takes the stage.
Okay.
Picture this. Each cell in your body is like a bustling city.
Okay.
Inside the city, we've got this amazing process called DNA replication happening.
Uh-huh.
That's where the genetic code gets copied. It's almost like there's a tiny printing press in there churning out copies of the blueprints.
So there's a copy machine in every cell.
Pretty much.
Wow, that's incredible. I never knew that.
It's wild, right? And then we've got another process called transcription.
Mm-hmm.
The DNA blueprint gets transcribed into a messenger molecule called RNA. You can think of it like taking notes from the master plan.
Okay, so we go from DNA to RNA, but then what? How do you actually build something from those notes?
That's where the final step, translation, comes
Okay.
in. So the RNA messenger, it takes the instructions to these things called ribosomes. They're like the protein factories of the cell.
Okay,
And those ribosomes read the RNA and assemble amino acids into proteins.
I got it.
And those proteins, those are the real workers. They build structures, they transport things. Basically, they run the whole show.
So it's like a whole little production line happening inside every cell.
Yeah.
But I have a question. If all cells have the same DNA, how come some become skin cells and some become brain cells?
That's because of this really awesome thing called gene regulation.
Okay.
You can think of it as a control panel. It basically tells each cell which genes to turn on and off.
Ah.
So certain genes will be activated in skin cells to produce melanin,
Right.
but different genes get flipped on in brain cells to make neurons.
So it's not just the genes themselves, it's about how they're controlled.
Exact.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and this is a big reason why scientists use model organisms to study all this stuff.
Yeah.
Creatures like fruit flies or zebrafish. Those guys share a lot of the basic genetic mechanisms that we do, but they're way easier to work with in a lab.
So we're learning about ourselves by studying fruit flies.
Kind of, yeah.
That's so weird and cool at the same time. Speaking of different organisms, you mentioned population genetics.
Right.
What's that all about?
Well, now we're zooming out.
Oh,
We're looking at the whole genetic makeup of entire groups.
okay.
Think of it like a giant census.
Got it.
It's a snapshot of all the different gene versions within a population.
Like if we looked at the gene pool for, say, hair color, we'd see all the variations like blonde, brown, red,
Exactly.
like how common each one is.
Yeah. And population genetics helps us understand how those variations change over time. like with evolution.
Oh, right. So like the environment might favor certain traits, and then those genes become more common over time.
Exactly. Survival of the fittest. And this actually brings us to a really powerful example from the stuff we were reading. Albinism amongst the Hopi people. It's a genetic condition where people can't produce melanin,
Right.
and it's actually way more common in this group.
Huh.
And it has this really unique cultural significance for them, too.
So it's not just about the genes themselves, it's how they're perceived and how they fit into the culture.
Exactly. It just goes to show that genetics touches every part of our lives, from the way our bodies work to our culture and even our history.
This has been amazing. We've covered so much.
We really have.
From microscopic blueprints to whole populations. It's mind-blowing.
It really is. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. The more we learn about our genes, the more possibilities open up.
For sure.
In medicine, agriculture, even just understanding ourselves as humans.
It really makes you think. Like, how could what we know about population genetics help us protect endangered species?
Exactly.
It's more than just science. It's ethics and huge questions about the future.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, that's our deep dive for today.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
As always, keep those brains buzzing. See you next time.